In the meantime, Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu has congratulated Liberians for the successful conduct of its presidential election. He applauded President-elect Joseph Boakai, urging him to unite the nation and deliver good governance. The Nigerian leader also commended outgoing President George Weah for his exemplary leadership, particularly for conceding the election, setting a positive precedent in West Africa. He also emphasized the importance of respecting the will of the people and praises Liberia for a peaceful exercise of their right, urging them to be dedicated to peace and democracy. And now to talk about this, I'm being joined live on the news by Augustine Tamba, who is the head of Secretariat Liberia Elections Observation Network. Glad to have you join me. Good afternoon.
From my end, is a pleasure always being on the media.
Okay. Now, as an election observer, what key factors would you say were considered when assessing the credibility and fairness of the electoral process in Liberia?
So one of the key factors that stood out for us in these elections was the introduction of the BVR, that is the biometric voter registration process that provided high level of credibility and confidence in the voter roll, as that was a kind of challenge in the past election in 2017. So the credibility of these elections was hugely dependent on the NEC being able to verify double registrants on the voter roll, and that stood out for both political parties and election observer group for us. And that is primarily in addition to all of the adherence of procedures, guidelines are set out by the National Election Commission. And we can say at this point that the National Election Commission conducted this process in a more professional manner that provided this trust and confidence that the Liberians currently have in the process.
Augustine, I mean, how do you think the concession call contributes to the overall electoral process, the electoral process and transition in Liberia?
This has actually placed our democracy ahead of other democracies in Africa, if not the world. Before the concession speech last night, there were a lot of speculations before the October 10. A lot of people believe or have projected that the elections were being basically peaceful, but the acceptance of the result were being challenging. And we saw semblance of that leading towards the pronouncement yesterday by the National Election Commission. But the demonstration by the outgoing president, actually revived the hope and aspiration of Liberians and strengthened the democracy of Liberia. I think it contributed or is contributing largely to this peaceful transition that we are witnessing as a country. And not many analysts thought that this will have come very soon. A lot of people projected or predicted that it would have been difficult for any candidate to accept the results, given the closeness of these results. As an institution, we did what we call an SBO, and in our data room, we saw how close and tight the election results could have been. But eventually, our projection as an institution actually fell in line with what the National Election Commission projected. So as the seated president to have considered last night in a nationwide speech, demonstrate how mature our democracy is becoming as a country.
Mr. Weah, Mr. Tamba, you talked about acceptance of results being challenged. I'm wondering, why is that so?
Probably you did not. Okay, so from the initial projection, a lot of analysts thought that given the closeness of the election result, the elections were being challenged by other candidates. That was the speculation. That was the initial speculation. from a lot of different analysts. Surprisingly to all of us, as observer group, as analysts, international observers, the concession speech by the president last night placed a huge hope in our democracy in terms of its maturity, and he demonstrated last night leadership, love for country, and that took every analyst off balance, because the initial projection was that there would have been contestation because the results were so very close to call who had won the election.
All right, Augustine, in your own opinion, what impact, for instance, did the rallying of support from smaller parties by the opposition candidate have on the dynamics of the election?
It played a very significant role. The runoff election was at a very critical stage in the dynamics, in our political dynamics in our country. And given the fact that our election is heavily dependent on regional alignment, ethnic alignment, the endorsement by smaller political parties play a very significant role in the overall outcome of the election. Again, that was basically what I term as a warfare, a mental warfare that these political parties were involved with. The optics that 20 political parties went to elections and like 17 are endorsing one political party, it could easily drive voters who were still sitting on the fence. And I think that played a very huge role. And if you look at those candidates that endorsed the now elected president, you had the candidate that came third in the elections, the candidate that came fourth in the election. All of them endorsed the current president-elect. So that optics alone, in terms of driving their supporters to voting the current president-elect, play a very significant role. And I think that was the basic struggle in this runoff campaign that the both political parties were actually struggling for.
Now, futuristically, what measures would you recommend, for instance, to enhance voter participation and confidence in future elections?
I think the National Election Commission, if not this current Board of Commissioners, need to standardize this level of public trust and confidence that they have initiated within the process, both ensuring that every basic steps along the road regarding our elections are discussed publicly, and they are able to reach out to political parties as major actors in the elections. But also, I believe that the maintenance of a pure system that can be audited by outsiders and be viewed as neutral needs to be maintained. I think the National Election Commission needs to maintain those standards so that in the future, people can, let's say citizens can have trust and confidence that ties into the voter roll, the way they handle the voter roll. If we will be doing biometric voter education or biometric voter registration in the future, the National Election Commission needs to explain the processes very clearly and to avoid the initial confusion that Liberians had at the inception of this electoral cycle. We introduced biometric voter registration, and now many persons felt that we were not going to use the biometric system on election day. So those kind of information in the future need to be very clear to the Liberian people as to the processes involved and how every Liberian can be able to independently verify and be able to build that confidence within the system. So I think the maintenance of what this system is from the National Election Commission in the future will say a lot to building credibility. And I also believe that the introduction of biometric can be linked to other biometric processes we have in our country, like the passport division, the national identification registry. If we can integrate all of these systems into one to ensure that we can easily identify citizens that are turning 18 in an election year to vote, it makes it much more even better for our democracy.
All right, Augustine, just to find out from you, do you think there was enough national orientation of Liberians ahead of these concluded elections?
National orientation in terms of the biometric voter registration process or on the overall election process?
Overall election process, the election process
Sure.
overall, yes.
So I think in the first place that a lot of Liberians knew that the country was going to elections this year as per our constitution, that the country was going to elections, and a lot of Liberians were aware. However, where Liberians fell short was on the processes, the detailed processes leading towards the conduct of the election. Like I intimated initially, the introduction of the biometric voter registration process was one in itself a confusing process at the inception of the electoral process. A lot of people did not get clear how the biometric voter registration process will eventually turn out, and that confusion was there eventually. From the inception of the entire process, the National Election Commission was not forthcoming in terms of its public communication and be able to put out information that the general public actually needed. So all of those contributed towards lack of information and a low confidence in the National Election Commission. However, as time went by, through different stakeholder meetings, there were recommendations that we specifically made to the National Election Commission in terms of ensuring that these processes are in the general public as much as possible, and that helped improve the system. So from the inception, there were low information in the general public, but as we move towards the end of the electoral cycle, more citizens got to understand how the electoral process was actually unfolding.
Okay, Mr. Tamba, I know you mentioned challenges with the biometric voter registration process, but aside these points you have mentioned, what other shortcomings would you like improved on in this just concluded election?
So on election day, we actually observed the lack of proper queue control. We observed also huge invalid votes are recorded in our elections. And as an institution prior to now, we did a comprehensive survey on the causes of invalid votes in our elections. And we believe what we saw also in the 2023 general and presidential election, we thought that the lack of civic and voter education contributed largely to the number of invalid votes that we experienced in these elections. So I would want to see that process improved as we move towards our future election. The second thing that I think or I saw was a bit problematic was the way our ballot papers are even designed. A lot of political parties campaigned on the number of the position they were on the ballot paper. However, when citizens turned out to vote on election day, they did not see those numbers. And because of the illiteracy rate in our country, people tend to make mistakes. And so we recorded a very huge number of invalid votes in these elections. So I think moving forward, part of the improvement, suggestion, or recommendation we are going to be making is the design of our ballot paper that will reflect the actuality of what political parties are going to be saying to their voters, so that when they enter the voting precinct, they will see exactly what political parties have been able to say to them. We have recommendation also on the complaint and hearing mechanism. We are still following up on the cases the National Election Commission currently has before it. We will make our full recommendation in that regard so as to improve the system for the next upcoming elections. So it's a full documentation that our institution will do at the end of the process, and we will actually study the entire electoral cycle from the beginning and to the very end of us releasing our SBO results data today.
All right, thank you so much for that detailed update regarding the elections in Liberia. Augustine Tamba, head of Secretariat Liberia Election Observation Network. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's always my pleasure.